Don't you know? You can't fight in the war room. That's me quoting a line from Dr. Strangelove while taking my kids on an outing. This is a place where people used to stand ready to destroy the world. You can't fight in here. You know, if I was a good dad, I would have taken them to Yellowstone or Disneyland or someplace that they actually want to go. But instead, I took my kids to a place where 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, people stood ready to usher in the end of the world as we know it.
As you climbed down the ladder, you knew this was the most powerful weapon system ever put on Earth.
What you're hearing is a segment from a video I made a few years back about the Quebec 01 Missile Alert Facility.
We were responsible for 950 nuclear weapons at that time. F.E. Warren was the most powerful combat unit in the West, probably the world.
F.E. Warren is an Air Force base in Cheyenne, Wyoming that actually hosted soldiers and cavalrymen as far back as 1867. But in 1947, its mission changed.
We prevented a nuclear war from happening. We did our job.
Well, F.E. Warren still has something like 15 active missile alert facilities and 150 missile silos that are also still active. Quebec 01 was actually decommissioned and is now open to tourists or whoever'd like to see it.
Yeah, much of it was designed to fight in and through a nuclear war.
What I learned when I was making that video about the power and the range, and most importantly, the philosophy behind why these missiles were made, still messes with my head.
To me, internationally, it's a street fight. It's identical to a street fight.
On this episode of That Doesn't Happen Every Day, in which we interview everyday people about things that don't normally happen every day, I load my kids in the car, and we make the 30-minute drive from our house to the place where the world might have ended.
In the closing months of the Second World War, 2 new weapons appeared, which have since revolutionized all concepts of modern warfare: the atomic bomb and the guided missile.
That's the voice of an Army Master Sergeant in some sort of post-World War II informational or training film.
Our Army has undertaken an extensive project to perfect and build guided missiles capable of carrying an atomic warhead.
What that upper-level sergeant is laying down is pretty much the sum and whole of why we got that cement hole near Cheyenne. And we didn't get just that one. Quebec 01 was one of many different missile alert facilities in Wyoming and Montana and the Dakotas that were the place where missiles were standing ready to go if the order came.
The missile first moves straight up under the combined thrust of all engines. At a certain distance above the Earth, it is programmed into a tilt, which aims it into a curve or arc, calculated to intersect the Earth some 5,500 miles away.
So how far is 5,500 miles? I don't know anything about how the curvature of the Earth or all these different factors play in, but in looking at Google Earth, Cheyenne is just a little under 5,500 miles from Moscow, if you go over the Arctic anyway. When making that interpretive video, I asked one of the former missileers how long it would take a nuke to leave the magic city of the plains and hit a target over in Russia.
We used to joke about it in those days, about 30 minutes or less, or your next one's free, and that's roughly accurate.
That's retired Air Force Colonel Andre Chappelle, who, by the way, I think is such a cool guy. If you don't get the reference, in the mid-1980s, Domino's Pizza told people they could get orders to their houses in 30 minutes or less, or it was free. An article from The Hustle said eventually, ironically due to safety concerns, the policy was changed from 30 minutes or less or it's free to 30 minutes or less or $3 off. But I love the repurposed slogan. In fact, former Air Force Captain Scott Matson, who you've heard a little bit from before and you'll hear more from later, even got business cards printed up with that phrase on it. I don't think the cards were authorized or condoned by the Air Force or by Domino's for that matter. But anyway, think of all the times you've been handed business cards from realtors to car salesmen. How different would it be to get a business card from someone whose job it is to usher in the apocalypse if the occasion should arise? When I finally exited off the interstate, I think my kids were disappointed that Ground Zero of the world's end looked, well, like everything else north of Cheyenne. Fields, fences, cows, the occasional ranch house. It's the most peaceful, unthreatening setting you can imagine. Leaving the off-ramp, we see the entry to the missile alert facility ahead, and aside from having lots of antennas sticking out of it and a bigger than normal fence around it, it really does look like any ranch house. We get out and walk towards the house. There are signs all over warning of rattlesnakes, and when I worked on that video about the site, people said that rattlesnakes were actually the most common threat to safety or security that anyone encountered out there.
See this big concrete thing? What do you think this is?
That concrete pad is actually a helipad, another incongruous thing you don't see too often on Wyoming ranches. The silos, not the farm and ranch kind, but the nuclear kind, are actually from 4 to up to 40 miles away from this little house. Big fat cables that were buried underground ran from the house to all 10 of the silos and would carry the launch order if it became necessary. At one time, simply getting onto this little spot on the prairie surrounded by a fence was a whole security protocol in itself.
I know there were some nuns who continually tried to break onto a launch facility where a missile is down in Colorado.
That's retired Air Force Colonel Tucker Fagan, another guy I got to talk to when working on the video who I also can't help but like.
U.S. troops cannot arrest civilians. It's called posse comitatus. We are not allowed to do that. So we can detain, and then the local sheriff, somebody not part of the military, can arrest them.
In addition to the dissident nuns, which sounds a lot like the name of a punk band from the 80s, other people have also protested the missile program in Wyoming.
It's going to take you a lot longer to get in there than it's going to take us to be there.
That's Joseph Fowles, a former senior flight security controller at Quebec 1. He was one of the airmen tasked with protecting the security of the missile alert facilities and the missiles themselves.
We've responded a few times to protests, most of the time scheduled, and you don't play when they're scheduled. You go out there, you stand in line, you let them do what they need to do, and then you very respectfully escort them off.
When I interviewed him, I had to ask if there was ever any concern about people, getting into the launch facility and trying to launch one of the missiles, or perhaps trying to steal one of them from the silos. You learn how hard it is to actually get at the spot where they launch the nukes from, let alone how hard it is in a second. But as for a brute force attempt to try and take the nukes or parts of them,
if we go out there and we can take you off of the site, that's great. If we can't, we'll obliterate the top of the site. We're talking grenade launchers, heavy machine guns. It's not going to get through to the missiles, so we don't care. We're going to just level the place. You're not leaving with a nuke.
As best as I understand it, it seems like F.E. Warren was and still is stocked with lots of airmen whose main job is to keep those sites secure. They are very well equipped, they're very well trained, and I think if you go ahead and try to breach one of the still active launch facilities or silos in the missile field, you've probably just given them permission to try out all the things they've been practicing for years on you. Not being hindered by any security protocols now, the kids and I walk in and look around at the ranch house / command center where Armageddon could have started at any time. The truth is, the ground level, the top side where most people who worked at the site were, is really innocuous. My daughter eyes the bunk beds where people like Joseph Fowles and other support troops slept.
So would you guys want to sleep here?
Yes, I'm tired.
You're tired?
Yeah.
It still has a pool table and a really nice stainless steel kitchen where Air Force chefs cooked meals.
That would be the thing, though, is actually having a chef. Because believe me, in the Army, we did not have chefs.
If you've ever eaten Army food, you'll assume that the world has already ended and they're just scraping together whatever's still left. But here at Quebec 01, where people waited on the end of the world, they at least ate pretty well while they were doing it.
Those are what actually do the boom, though.
I point to a picture of the long conical structures that are the actual warheads that ride on top of the missile.
Birthday hats.
Yeah.
Next up, we look at a panel that's covered with patches and the different insignia that different units used who worked in the missile field.
It's a skeleton with a cowboy hat riding
that's the most Wyoming thing I've seen.
Riding one of the warheads in.
Yes, it reminds me exactly of when Slim Pickens rode the bomb in, waving his cowboy hat in the air in Dr. Strangelove.
I like that one.
You like that one?
It says Peacekeeper, so you know that the skeleton's nice.
Yeah, that's what that one says.
So you know the skeleton's nice?
Yeah, I like this one.
The launch facility is equipped with TVs and VCRs, and sometimes people could actually watch real movies on them that were fun to watch instead of just training videos. The museum also has an exhibit of movies based on things related to nuclear wars, like Failsafe, War Games, First Strike, and, of course, Dr. Strangelove. However, I found one made-for-TV movie that I actually saw as a kid that scared the heck out of me. The Day After.
It was about a nuclear strike that just kind of ends the world, and it was just the most depressing movie I'd ever seen.
I wonder if there are any rules about what people working at the launch facility were allowed to watch or not, especially, again, movies like The Day After. It's time for the tour to start. We're taken to the door where officers would have to go through another security protocol to start their journey to the elevator and then to the launch capsule underground.
And there was a door that went from the flight security controller's office into the area where you would enter the elevator.
Before we ride this 60-year-old elevator, we're asked if anyone would have any problems climbing the 60 feet up the ladder next to the shaft if the elevator stops working. My kids are stoked and hope it doesn't work so they can take the ladder. I think it's funny that this elevator that's taking us down to a room with what had millions of dollars of equipment and control of state-of-the-art weaponry is the kind of old elevator where you close an accordion door and then you close an inner accordion door, and that's what keeps you safe as you drop down 60 feet. You can see the wall past the gate going by as we go down, and it's covered with different signatures from different airmen. I don't know what it is about people, especially the young, bored ones, that makes them want to write on everything, but there is a fair amount of graffiti left by people who served here. It makes me think about how I've seen pictures of people who wrote messages on bombs and other weapons of war. This makes me wonder if anyone ever actually wrote anything on any of those missiles in their silos when they were still here. It seems like it would be irresistible to scribble something on a multi-million-dollar death machine with your Sharpie, but at the same time, it is a multi-million-dollar death machine that is used in national security. And if someone finds your name or really anything scribbled on something with such secure access, it seems that the Air Force could find you out pretty quick. Scott Madsen brought up that these missiles are supposed to go so far, so accurately, that adding just a thin layer of ink or chalk or whatever because you want to write something on one of them really might not be a good idea. Tucker Fagan describes what you see when you get to the bottom of the elevator shaft.
There's a big blast door. It's open from the inside. The crew's the only people who can open that because they're in there.
That blast door is hard to describe because it's so different than anything I'd ever seen before. It's what seals off the elevator shaft from the area where the Missileers pulled an alert in a capsule, as well as an area with some machinery and other equipment. My best comparison is if you picture the round door to a bank vault, but make it like 3 times as big and maybe 3 times as thick, and that's the giant door that kept Missileers safe from human threats, but mostly any nuclear threat that might happen. I asked our tour guide why she didn't close it, because I had when I filmed down there. She said that the last time she had, someone was messing with it, and then she had trouble opening that giant thick metal door designed to withstand nuclear blasts. I'm so glad I didn't have any problems when I was taping alone down there. Off to the right is the capsule, where Missileers were posted every day, all day, for decades in different shifts, in case they were needed to turn keys on the apocalypse.
So you had a capsule that was sitting on what we call shock isolators, and those shock isolators were akin to the shock absorbers in your car, and the concept was that if a weapon detonated 3 or 5 miles away, whatever the case might be, that those shock absorbers would absorb the shock, and you could maintain your presence in your chair at your console so that you could turn the key if necessary.
Sure enough, the capsule really is suspended on giant shock absorbers that do look like what's on your car, but way bigger. I start swaying and moving around to see if I can get them to move. Then the tour guide told me that I won't be able to, so I try to get everyone on the tour to join in and sway and move with me in time, and then she tells me to stop, that we might mess it up. So apparently the unified movements of we, the people of the tour group, are more powerful than a nuclear bomb. Maybe we were just bugging her, though.
I know my kids had to have a talk with me later about not doing that again.
Dad tried to trick the thing and I didn't like to. It was embarrassing.
This underground capsule is kind of like a big jelly bean where the world could have ended. A quick note here, the place where the Missileer is actually set on alert is called the acoustical enclosure. It's basically inside the capsule, but from here on out, I'm just going to refer to where they set and the whole area as the capsule. We enter the capsule, or the acoustical enclosure, and see a stainless steel toilet with a wooden seat, which I thought was weird. There's a bed with curtains around it where one member of the team could get some rest. And then the rest of the room is mostly just consoles and monitors and buttons. 2 chairs are mounted on rails lined up to take you to different parts of the console.
The seats are actually old aircraft seats, but worked well here, and you would strap in because you knew that the concussion of an incoming detonation of a nuclear weapon could throw you out of the seat. If you took a direct hit, shock isolators and the seat belts were not going to do anything for you. But if there was a hit relatively close, they could keep you in your seat so that you could actually do your job.
So how do you actually fire a nuke?
If the president decides that it's time to expend a nuclear weapon, he'll send the code over a series of communication systems that we have. You would receive those messages and you would decode them and validate them. And if it all checks out, then we start the process. We start the checklist to launch the weapon.
There's a big red box in the capsule with 2 padlocks on it, containing what are called the sealed authenticators. At this point, Missileers would unlock those padlocks and take out those codes to verify the message sent by the president. I'd actually interviewed Colonel Chappelle in a decommissioned simulator capsule down at Peterson Air Force Base, and he gets up and shows how missiles were to be launched after everything was authenticated.
To actually launch a missile, you turn a key, and it takes 2 crew members to have 1 key turn here and 1 key turn over here, and he's turning this key, and the commander is up there turning that key, and the keys have to be turned within a fraction of a second of one another. And you can see that they're physically far enough apart that one individual can't turn both keys at the same time.
For some reason, the keyhole is kind of outlined or surrounded by a big piece of plastic that's in an arrow shape. It kind of reminds me of the Star Trek symbol, which, of course, made me wonder if that was on accident or on purpose. Former Air Force Captain Scott Matson takes over the launch.
And when the commander was ready, he would say, hands on keys. The deputy would echo each step, and the commander would say, key turn on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark. And then both would turn their keys.
That would put 1 vote in the system. You needed 2 votes to make the missile launch. Another safeguard, which meant another crew in another capsule would have to key turn, in that same time frame. So a second vote would go to the missile.
It should be noted that even if you got 4 different rogue Missileers who conspired to launch missiles, they still wouldn't be able to launch the missile without the codes that they need from the president. And if they even tried, all that would happen would be that they'd get caught, and I don't want to think about what would happen to them. If Peacekeeper missiles were launched, up to 10 warheads, remember the birthday hats, would separate from the missile at the apex of the arc and then begin to spin like independent bullets to different targets. The information I could find said that each of them would hit with about 20 times the power of that bomb that landed on Nagasaki.
I thought about it often, sitting on alert, knowing that at my fingertips was this enormous destructive firepower. How could I actually launch if the president ordered me to launch? Well, the way that I viewed it was that our system works to the point that if the president decided that the only resort that he had to preserve the liberty and the integrity and the democracy that we enjoy, then I would have been convinced that he's exhausted all available means, and the only thing left was to launch a nuclear weapon.
People would always say, how could you do something like that? It's just like as a soldier, could you really shoot at somebody? Well, if they're shooting at you, obviously that makes it easier.
I guess you could argue that being in that capsule, surrounded by all of that shielding and having those shock absorbers and seatbelts and everything, would give you a pretty good chance of surviving the initial strikes of a nuclear war. So I had to ask the Missileers if the war started and they had survived the initial strikes, what were they supposed to do after? You would think, being military, there would be order after order.
At the end of the capsule, there is an escape hatch there. And it looks like a manhole, and there's a way to take that manhole cover off and then there's sand in there, and you're supposed to poke it out. But there really wasn't a plan that, okay, you'd come out of the capsule, come back to Cheyenne. That wasn't there. It was like, get out and look around, I guess.
We had no plan after that. If you survived the war, it was, you're on your own.
The tour guide brought up the point that when you heat sand up, it turns to glass. So you do have to wonder how many feet of that sand might have turned to very thick, very hardened glass that you're not going to be able to break out of. Were these escape hatches really there to be effective, or were they sort of like using a blanket in those duck and cover videos from the 50s? Not actually effective, but there to make people feel like there was something that could be done. One thing that really blew my mind when I was trying to find B-roll for the video about Quebec 1 were all of these photos from the National Archives showing Russian bigwigs, colonels, generals, I didn't know what their ranks were, inside American launch capsules, standing right there with American officers who were talking to them. As a glorified private in the Army, we were told that even really basic pictures shared on social media or something really innocuous, we might say, could be used by someone who is trained to gather a lot of intelligence about us and what we were up to. So I couldn't fathom why you would let an enemy into a space, again, about twice the size of a big bathroom, full of all kinds of secret and technical and powerful stuff.
The concept behind nuclear weapons, the mission of nuclear weapons is deterrence.
We want to deter other people from misbehaving. We really don't want to use them, but we want them in their brain that they know we can hurt them badly. You start a war, we are killing you, guaranteed.
And there it is. The philosophy of warfare I learned about when making that video wasn't about surprising your enemy with artillery or small arms fire to destroy what they have. This is about showing your enemy what you are perfectly capable of and hoping that he'll take that information back to Moscow or wherever decisions are made and share it so that the threat will be seen as so real and so frightening that other options become more appealing.
The old men of the Soviet Union, they wanted to live. They had built this system and this society, they thought, and the last thing they wanted was to see that destroyed. Plus, they didn't believe in an afterlife.
You have to put fear into that adversary so that they know, A, you have the capability, B, you have the will to take them out.
After the tour, we went to an exhibit topside where you could write your reflections and thoughts on Post-it notes and stick them to a board. The kids and I started reading them.
We should all be peaceful with one another. We should not need nuclear weapons at all.
There are a few messages like this about how nukes or war or both are wrong. And then I saw this one.
Be real, peace through deterrence. Not all are willing to be peaceful. There it is.
Whenever I hear someone make an argument, like I saw on the first note, that we should all just get along, I don't disagree at all. But the problem is, the more realistic question that's always gotten at me is how do you stop someone or a group of someones who have absolutely no concern for anyone else and are willing to hurt or kill entire militaries and entire nations to get what they want? I don't mean any specific one country or one group of people, because throughout history it seems like many countries have spawned someone willing to seize power and use it to do whatever they want to whoever they want, and unfortunately, the only way to stop them is by force or the threat of it.
Kim Jong-un, does he care about his people? Does he care about the cities? Does he care about his military? I'm not sure he cares about his dog and his family. He cares about himself.
I asked my little girl what she's writing on her Post-it note to put up on the display.
What are you going to write, Zoe?
I'm going to write, thank you for keeping us safe, and the missiles are all mixed just in case.
I want to thank you for listening to this episode of That Doesn't Happen Every Day. I want to make sure to thank Andre Chappelle, Tucker Fagan, Scott Matson, Joseph Fowles, and Dave Cummings. Dave Cummings was the first guy that you hear in the video. Thank you all for your service and what you've done for our country, and thank you for answering all of the dumb questions I asked you about something that was a completely different concept to what I was used to. I'd like to thank the Quebec 01 Missile Alert Facility. I have put a link in the description all about them, as well as when you can visit them and how to get there. I also want to thank KHOL out of Jackson, who plays the show every Wednesday. If you've enjoyed this episode and would like to hear more, please do a search for That Doesn't Happen Every Day. Every day is 2 words in this case, podcast, and you can listen to every show I've ever made completely for free. Thank you for listening. I hope to have a new one to you in about 2 weeks.